this is our next conversation, and it's with someone that I've really wanted to speak to for a long time, which is Martin Robert Hall. Martin, just before we get into the topic for today's conversation, can you just give us a quick intro to who you are and what you do?
Yes, certainly, Chris. Welcome everybody, whoever's listening. I've been running my own business now for 13 years. I come from a sports science background, and what led me into that was just a fascination really with high performance, a real passion for sport, but really an interest in what is it that makes people tick, human behavior, why are successful people successful, what drives high performance, and then studying my degree and various other things, just understanding how all of these components come together. And really the psychology of high performance is what gripped me in the beginning. And then that led me, post degree into the business world and into sales and into training. And again, very people focused areas and roles that I was attracted to. And always around the soft skills. What I found is in all of those roles, the soft skills were always the things which helped people to excel, but weren't spoken about as much. And I just saw a lot of correlation between what I was finding in the business world and what fascinated me from the sports world. And that sort of led me on my own journey of discovery, learning, personal development, professional development. And eventually I decided to start my own consultancy, sharing these ideas that I'd learned. And yeah, 13 years later, I've just finished writing. In fact, I've got a copy here. It's just the author copy, so it's not been released yet, but this is my third book. So
oh, right, okay.
Yeah, so I'm delighted that, and somewhat surprised as well that I've actually managed to write 3 books. If you'd have gone back many years and told some of my teachers that, they would have laughed in your face, I think. But it's amazing how much you can grow and learn as an adult, and continuous growth and development. And so that's always been a passion of mine. And then taking that knowledge and that I've learned myself, I'm practicing it myself, but also coaching other people and then sharing that with people through books, through presentations, through training courses, through coaching. And that's what I spend my time doing now. Probably spend about 75% of my time in the business world,
okay,
with a variety of businesses, and the rest of the time within professional sport, working on exactly the same things. And I think that the relationship between business and sport is very interesting. There's a lot of differences, but the one thing that they have in common, and it's a big thing, is that both industries are trying to achieve success results through people. So it's about getting the best out of people. And that's my passion, and that's what my business is all about.
Excellent. Good. Well, I think, you and I have got a very sort of similar kind of background, and I didn't realize this, but as a business, we probably came across you through your leadership courses. I've been on your leadership course, and I think in that leadership course, it dawned on us that we were both at Coventry University doing sports science at the same time. I think you were the year ahead of me.
Yeah.
I know it was a crazy thing, but I think I certainly buy into the idea of there's a lot of value you can take from the sporting world and apply it to business, and vice versa as well. I think it's quite a well-trodden path. You look at people like Sir Clive Woodward, you have the similar kind of principles and values as well. What I wanted to talk to you about today, and it was about leadership and about developing those leadership skills, and that's how we sort of, I suppose, started working with you as a business. One thing I've noticed with a lot of the engineering businesses that I recruit for is there seems to have been a vacuum in terms of leadership experience and candidates for leadership. I think it's partly because of the sort of the pandemic. I think a lot of the more experienced, more senior people who have probably occupied leadership roles maybe towards the end of their careers opted for early retirement. And one of the things that I'm constantly find as an issue with a lot of the clients is they can't find people that've got those leadership skills, and they're looking for a track record. So from a client side of things, they struggle to recruit those. And then also when I'm speaking to candidates on the other side of things, they're also thinking, well, I'm a talented engineer, maybe I'm ambitious, I want to step up and become a leader. But it seems to be the most difficult step for a lot of people to go from being a sole contributor into being a leader. So what I thought would be really good would be to kind of pick your brains on that, Martin, as to sort of what the process is like. What kind of traits should my clients be looking out for, and what kind of things can, our candidates do to sort of think, right, well, these are the steps I need to take to get me into that leadership sort of position. So I've got a few questions that I just wanted to sort of ask. So, I mean, first of all, I've seen it from a recruitment point of view about a lot of people leaving industry and maybe a bit of a vacuum in leadership. Obviously, you do a lot of work in terms of running your leadership and management courses. What's your experience? What's your sort of view of that been? Have you seen a change in the profile of the people that are coming on your courses at all, or has that remained fairly consistent? Or
Good question. I think, look, the last 2 years through a global pandemic has certainly changed the landscape for businesses and some of the challenges they're facing around the people. I'm experiencing two sides, really. I've definitely seen a growth in interest around leadership training. People, companies, organizations wanting to invest in their people and upskill them for one of two reasons. One, yes, because they may see a vacuum, they're losing senior people. The other one being growth. I'm working with a few businesses that have really benefited from the pandemic, and they're growing as a result. That presents different challenges. What it means is that the ceiling is the number of people, and therefore they need to develop more leaders. And whereas previously they've relied on having less, and if they lose some of those people, it's keeping that momentum and keeping those skills always being developed. And so there's a couple of programs longer term, and I mean 12-month plus programs I'm running with a couple of clients where it's about developing future leaders, and it's identifying the people which they show an interest in that, but investing in them before they're actually managing people. And we can dive into this, but because I've got a lot of thoughts and ideas around it.
Okay.
But for me, that's a really important point, because leadership begins within, and the first person you have to lead is yourself. And so a lot of the skills of leadership begin with people managing themselves first. So these are skills which are vital and important for anyone looking to be a successful professional in their industry anyway. Then actually going on to manage others is, that in itself is an entire skill set. And, for me, my belief around this is that people can acquire those skills. But in terms of our businesses finding a challenge, yes, I think so. One of the challenges of that, by the way, has been that now a lot of businesses aren't in the office as much. And what that means is that peer-to-peer learning, where you're just absorbing from your environment and seeing how senior and experienced people within an organization operate, and just absorbing that from being in their presence, being in that environment, and just picking up lessons day to day. That isn't happening. So people are away in their own private spaces and not being exposed to that. And I think that definitely creates a leadership challenge.
Yes, yeah. I think, it's interesting. We were just talking in the office earlier on today, actually. We have a weekly meeting every Friday. And we were talking about the importance of obviously formal training sessions, but also those informal conversations that we had. We were actually talking about book reviews, and a few of us are kind of bookworms in the office. So we were talking about what book's been good for people and how's it helped them. And it's sometimes those informal conversations are so valuable. If I think back to all the lessons I've learned, you do get a lot of that from just the close proximity to people. But it's an interesting challenge about now the hybrid working or the remote working of how you pick up those leadership skills, because it's just, you don't have the same proximity. I want to circle back though to a point there that you made about growth of businesses and that being, you know, driving challenges as well. And we have gone through a period since the pandemic really of just a huge rebound, and lots of businesses got so much demand, the kind of demand they would have killed for probably 2 or 3 years ago. And now it's like a completely different stress. And we do see, well, I've seen in my career, when businesses go through tough times, they usually take layers of management out. And I think now obviously they're realizing how it's important to sort of obviously get those leaders in. So I guess probably the next thing leading on from that is you mentioned there that leadership it's a skill set that you can acquire. If there's someone out there watching this who wants to become a leader, what's your advice in terms of the first step that they should take, and then the different kind of things that they should then follow on from that would be? What would they be?
Wow, I mean, that's a great question. It's a big question. That I think the first thing is, yes, I think that leadership, that often the first inspiration or catalyst, if you like, for somebody wanting to develop into a leader is to be inspired. Right. And that may be that at some point, you know, what I talk about in my programs is leadership. If we were to link it to one word, the one word I would always bring it back to that sprouts off every little avenue of leadership comes back down to influence. Okay.
Yeah.
And if most people think through their lives of who has had the biggest influence on them and who's had significant influence in, say, their career, we think back to those moments of those people and how they were, and that inspires us. And often that's where it begins. It begins with being inspired, either in a positive way or inspired from a negative experience. And sometimes that can be just as, if not more, motivating when we've had a bad experience, a poor leadership example, and we think to ourselves, I don't want anyone else to ever experience that. So therefore, I'd love to learn how to be able to do the opposite and have a positive impact on people if I've experienced a negative impact on me. And it's one of those two reasons which, those approaches which normally is the trigger for people.
Yeah.
But firstly, leadership, yes, there are skills to develop as a leader that we can learn, develop, sharpen, but it begins with a mindset. And a lot of my content, as you know, you've been through the 2-day program, is we start with the mindset. And that begins within. Leadership, all leadership begins within. And so some people they may not set out, and I think a lot of people don't set out and think, do you know what, I want to be a leader, I want to manage people. It's not easy. Let's put that out there first, right? All the managers listening to this will know it is not easy. So not that many people will think, yeah, I really want to manage. Some people will, if they've had, like I say, one of those experiences. But in the main, for me, it should be driven by a desire to want to improve.
Yeah.
And the desire to improve, that is innate to most human beings. If we've got our basic needs met, that desire to improve brings us fulfillment. As Maslow talked about, it was esteem. It's we grow, and the more successful and more we achieve, we feel esteem on the back of that. So that's a healthy starting point for somebody want to improve themselves, be better at what they do, and as a result of that, they grow. And when they grow, they learn things which would be useful for other people to learn. And what you'll probably start to find is then people start to gravitate to that person, and without even formally being asked to, or as part of their role, they start to lead people around them, because leadership comes down to influence. So in some way, whether we like it or not, we are all leaders. Now, there's a difference between a good leader and a bad leader. But if leadership is about influencing people, then in some way we're all leaders, because we're all having an influence, whether that's formally or informally, friends, family, environment, colleagues, all of the people that we surround ourselves and spend time with and have communication with in some form, we're influencing them. and that's a form of leadership.
Yeah.
But there's obviously a difference between doing that consciously and doing it without even knowing the impact that we're having. And so I think the healthy starting point is just a desire to improve and oneself firstly, and
Yeah.
and it grows from there. You know,
Got
because
you.
there'll always be people that can learn from your experience.
Yes, yeah, no, that's an interesting point there about starting with the inspiration and that it's almost purpose, isn't it? And I think a lot of the things that I've read, whether it be about leadership or just personal improvement or and that side of things, I think if you always start with your purpose, then that's the almost like the anchoring point, the driving force, isn't it? And then you can look at breaking it down then into the various sort of practical steps that you take. But no, I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, it is. And you know, you mentioned the word purpose. Very interesting. You know, we could talk for this whole podcast just about that. I cover a lot of that in my programs. But interestingly, what I've found is, and I've had, interestingly as well, in the last couple of years, more leaders of businesses come to me and want me to help them to discover their own purpose and really get under the skin of why they do what they do, more than ever before. But what I've found is that most people don't know, they've not given it that much thought. So I have exercises and, you know, and ideas and concepts I share around helping people to develop their purpose and really understand why they do what they do. But in the main, most people struggle with it at the start. So it's not something which is common and people just are going to work and really understand why they do what they do, in my experience. And, you know, I'm talking about experienced professionals who are successful. But purpose is something different than just, say, achieving your goal. The purpose is the why. It's the why you do what you do, and really understand that and breaking that down. And when you have clarity over that, it helps you make decisions about your goals, the direction you want to go, the things you're going to spend time on and the things you're going to not spend time on. You know, and that's a whole other side of this. We could get into the whole managing our time, you know, debate. And ultimately, that's the challenge for leaders, isn't it? It's where they devote their time. It becomes even more of a challenge for them because there's more demands on them.
Yes, yeah.
You know, so purpose is one which is, I think, has a real big impact on people. It's becoming much more. It's the awareness around it and the impact it can have on somebody is growing. But still, in my experience, a lot of people are not, you know, they're really not clear on what theirs is and the impact it can have. And so there's still a lot of growth and learning for people to do in that area, I believe.
Yes, yeah, no, that's absolutely. Is there anything that someone can start, you know, like a thing to try by themselves or maybe with friends or colleagues that would help them go down that path of discovering their purpose and
yeah, there's
guess
lots.
bringing it into their consciousness.
There's so many, to be honest. You know, I talk about it to give some thoughts and ideas on it in my book, How Leaders Make It Happen. Simon Sinek, probably one of the most sort of, you know, he popularized it really with his TED Talk, Start With Why, and then he wrote a book about that. And then he's even wrote a follow-on book from that, which is Find Your Why. And he, you know, it leads you through a process to be able to discover more of your purpose. And I think it begins with a curiosity and then asking yourself questions. And sometimes people go to coaching for that to help other people facilitate that process. Like I said, I've had some of my clients come to me for that. So there's lots of different ways, but it begins with a curiosity. And ultimately, the hard work, though, you know, for me, one of my philosophies is that I believe all the answers that people need are within, but accessing those answers is not that easy. And sometimes it can take time. You need to be patient. You know, you need to be persistent. It's not always comfortable. That time in reflection, and most people busy themselves with things when in fact a lot of the answers and the reflection come when people slow down. And I think we saw that, didn't we, through the pandemic? A lot of people having realizations when they finally were forced to stop. gaining more clarity over their lives, their careers, their direction than they probably had done in a very long time.
Oh yeah, I've lost count to the number of people that I would have dealt with for probably a number of years before as engineers and so on. And then suddenly they have this enforced stop and they say, do you know what? I don't want to do it anymore. I want to do something completely different. And you know, well, I've been doing this for so long, and a lot of people do almost like sleepwalk their way through their working lives, don't they? And that's not to their detriment. It's just, you know, sometimes we think short term, don't we? So so that's you know, certainly like it's not uncommon, but I think it sounds like it's a skill to ask yourself the right questions, or you need someone around you who's going to ask those questions of you
Absolutely,
to get you thinking in the right way.
Yeah, it is a skill, but like I said, you know, my approach to leadership development, it's a skill, but the skills come secondary to the mindset. So the first is there has to be a willingness and a curiosity there to even want to seek out and reflect on some questions. But certainly the skill of asking the questions, I know for me personally, the skill of being able to coach myself and ask myself those questions and gain clarity developed so much more when I learned those coaching skills to help other people. You know, I sharpened those skills by using them on myself.
Yes.
My coaching skills got better by coaching myself.
Got you. Actually, that's an interesting one as well. Whenever we do training sessions in the office, we do a lot of internal sessions where we'll share best practice and things like that. But sometimes it's the person who's maybe identified a weakness in themselves. We'll ask them to lead the session just because it encourages a different way of thinking. And I mean, it sounds pretty uncomfortable for that person. It's not. We're quite nice and friendly and all that sort of thing. But by getting them to lead the session, it just drives that those sort of coaching skills, and then you know they generally walk away with the most value from that session. So that's an interesting point of view. That the style of learning can change as well. So so there we go. So once you've identified this person, or you're the individual, and you've got this willingness, this inner fire to become a leader, you know, then maybe you've asked yourself these questions, and you've got like an idea of what your own purpose is. Let's get a little bit more practical. You know, what are the things that, you know, from your courses that you conduct? What are the kind of key principles or key skills that a future leader would need to start developing in themselves?
Okay, good question. I think just the first part of, you know, your question about, imagine, you know, you have identified you've got this fire, or you want to be a leader, and just on that bit, I have worked with some people that have fantastic skills and qualities for leadership, but they would not see it for themselves.
Okay.
I think the job is to identify that potential in other people and challenge them and inspire them, but challenge and encourage them to go down that path of discovery, learning. And that might be, if you manage someone in a business, you give them a training opportunity to go out there, whereas some people might not be willing or even see the point or the purpose of it in the beginning, because they might not see that in themselves. What great leaders do, and my experience, if you think back to your own and everyone listening, for me, great leaders, they often see something in you when you can't see it for yourself. And I know in my life, people that have had significant impact on me have seen something in me before I've maybe seen it in myself. And I can go all the way back to my formal education, school, and teachers that saw it there. And then I can think of many examples of teachers that just didn't see it. And by the way, you know, I'm not saying in school I wasn't exactly giving out the academic sort of, you know, vibes that, oh, look, I'm really keen to learn, because I personally, I wouldn't say I was that engaged. But so some teachers just picked up on that and just thought, and you know, and didn't see that potential. But some teachers must have saw through any of that, saw potential in me, and I really responded to that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, just on that point, I think that's a really key one, because I don't want everybody listening to this thinking, that everybody is going to be forthcoming and outgoing enough to go out and seek their own development. Sometimes people need to be led. That's the whole idea, leading people, right? So there's that side. Then the practical steps in doing that. Well, let me break this down into two parts, because I can walk you through fairly quickly my leadership formula. I have a process, a formula that I take people through. But before that, we can think about, well, how can you go about seeking that learning, knowledge, development? Well, there's different layers, isn't there, of learning? You can, like I said, you can pick up a book, right? There are hundreds, millions of, thousands of books on leadership. You can start reading. You can consume a podcast. You can listen to an audiobook. So we watch whatever form of learning you like. So there's such a low barrier to entry to learning today. It's so readily available to gain knowledge. But I think if you really want to develop and grow, you need to be in an environment where you're sharing your ideas with people, you're getting some feedback and discussion, you're hearing from other people. That's why I like to run open courses with people from multiple industries. So there's just that cross-pollination of experience, industry, and from that comes additional benefits. And you also need people to be on that journey with you that maybe are going to hold you to account. There's going to be some follow-up, because the studies show around retention. You read a book, and 3 months later, 90% of it you've forgotten, right?
Yes.
Apart from you take the ideas in the book, you write them down, you develop them into actions, they maybe become a habit. Unless it becomes implementable straight away, then the retention really increases. But just reading alone, we're consuming more information than ever before. So there's that side of it in terms of seeking out your development. Knowledge is available everywhere, but I think we need some experiential, development where we're being challenged by people. There's follow-up, repetition, and that's where the best learning happens. Okay? And that's the approach I take, because I know that the retention and the implementation then of the knowledge is at its most optimal. In terms of just giving you a bit of an idea into my formula, and I guess the basics of what I teach, it's called the ABLE formula, what I follow. And all the letters stand for a different area of leadership. It starts with authenticity. That's the A. And that's all about understanding your personality. So what is your natural personality? And I use a profiling tool, which you've completed and you understand.
We did a lot of work on that, didn't we, on the DISC profile as well? But I mean, digging into the theory behind it, so a lot of people may have done DISC studies and DISC profiles. Sometimes just taking doing the questionnaire and getting the readout is that's only a skim the surface. What I found fascinating about your course was like digging into all the theory and the science behind that. And I think it allows you to then think, well, if I'm a leader, I've got to communicate, I've got to speak to loads of different types of personalities of people. And it kind of really woke up my mind to that as well. But that was interesting.
You mentioned the word communication. Right, and that's an absolutely pivotal word in leadership.
Yes.
Sir Alex Ferguson, said that it was the most important part of all of his leadership. Right, we know it's pivotal, and that is very much what authenticity is all about. It's understanding who am I as a personality. That's what the profiling does. But then, who are the other personalities, and how do they like to be communicated with? And what just because I communicate in one way, that's not going to resonate with everybody. So understanding that actually, to adapt my style, to get our communication right, we need to understand who's receiving it, and having that understanding of the different personalities, how they process information, how they view the world, the lens through which they see things, the types of communication they prefer, and the things that they shy away from. So that's key. And then once we've focused on that, so there's two elements to that. There's understanding myself and then understanding others.
Yeah.
Then we move into the B, which stands for belief. And that's all around the mindset piece. So I said we work a lot on the mindset. And that's all around understanding how does the brain, right, from it, in understanding the brain's role in our behavior. And really what that means is what is the link between our thinking, our feelings, our emotions, and our behaviors, and therefore our results. And if we can understand the connection between those four, then we can influence our results. And that's what people want. Everybody wants results, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's results for themselves or results for other people, that they're leading. So understanding the link between that and the things that we can do, the simple changes that we can make that have an influence on our results. Because a lot of people try and change the results and the performance at a behavioral level without first identifying and checking what's going on at a subconscious psychological level. At this level of thinking, if my thinking does not align with the behaviors I need to get the results I want, then what's going to happen is I'm either going to do something inconsistently or I'm not going to do it at all. So we have to address that level of thinking, and that underpins so much of our individual and team performance. So I like to get to that level with people. Let's get to the level of thinking, because when we change that, we change everything above it. We change the behaviors, we change the results then. So
I think beliefs is a big one. And just to jump in on that one, I think one of the things that I learned after uni, I went into sales, and then that led me into recruitment. But one of the most important things I learned was you don't sell something you don't believe in. Because you can't. On a subconscious level, it gets you. It'll get you down. You'll lose the motivation, the commitment. Whereas if it's something you believe in, then that's fine. And I suppose to expand that out, what I've known from my own experience is I can't manage people in a way that I don't believe in. I've got my own sort of personal values and beliefs, and I always feel happiest when I stick close to those, even if it means in the short term I might have to take a hit on something. I know longer term it's going to serve me well. But yeah, belief is a massive one. Sorry, I jumped in on you there, Martin. But
no, it's okay. I like
resonate with that point.
It's a good point. In fact, the bit you made about, yes, that's often the first rule of sales. Like, you have to believe in the product. But sometimes, so example, I was with a recruitment client this week, and they were talking about often the way they're perceived by people. And there's a stigma around recruiters and perceived around that. And so some people coming into the industry of recruitment, they initially may have a perception that's been influenced elsewhere without any real experience of a recruiter, and not actually understand what it really is they do. And so that exists a lot. A lot of beliefs people have and collect, but how much truth is that belief based on?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of beliefs out there, opinions that people have. Belief's quite a strong word, but it's the same thing as an opinion about something that they don't really know that much about. And the thing that can often change that is knowledge, understanding. And so, it might be that you see a product, you don't like it, you don't believe in it, but then you learn more about it. Somebody has it, you learn more about it, you come to actually quite like it, then you become to really like it, and actually your beliefs can change. So I think what good salespeople do is they challenge and change people's beliefs, and sometimes you have to do that. You have to get under the skin and change people's beliefs. The other thing you mentioned, which I thought was key, is you have to lead in a way which is authentic to you. And that's the bit where I go back to the A in my formula of being authentic. A lot of people have this misconception that leadership is, it's a particular style. And what I've found is that there are leaders all the way around the personality map. Leadership is not a personality style. Yes, okay. So I think traditionally, and I'm talking historically, although I've started to see this change in the last 5 years. But if I go 15 years ago, maybe more the outgoing type of personalities were drawn to the leadership roles just because it involves, people. But I'm starting to see now some great leaders emerging, and they are not outgoing. They're more reserved personalities, but they've got fantastic qualities that other people can really benefit from. So it's not reserved for a personality, and you have to do it in an authentic way, because if you don't, like you said, you feel like you're compromising your own values, and therefore that's going to create a conflict within you, which is just not sustainable.
Yeah. Got you. There's that famous quote, isn't it? And I'm sure I'm going to get this wrong now, but it's some leaders are sort of born great, some discover greatness, and others have greatness sort of thrust upon them. And I suppose what you're referencing there is maybe you get probably the unlikely leaders who, through circumstances, they shouldn't get shoved into a position of leadership and actually realize, you know what, I can do this, or others around them will see something in them and they'll follow that. And when it's authentic to them, then that's fine. But I think one of the things that I liked from the course that you did, especially when we're talking about the DISC profile, you expect a lot of leaders to be dominant characters and driven and the strong sort of D in terms of dominance. But there's loads of people that I can think of who would be completely on the other side. Would be more around stability and security and or maybe just more the influence side of things. So there's lots of different personality types that you can have on that side of things. So that's quite key. Just circling back to a point as well that you made before about having other people believe in you. I think one thing that struck me listening to you is that many of our sort of business leaders who will watch this, who maybe looking to try and develop people within their team, they've got to realize that they've got a really important role to play. If they might identify someone on the team who's maybe got the right traits but might not be coming forward, because sometimes it's giving them that person that little bit of encouragement to come forward, that little bit of nudge, a bit of belief by saying, listen, I think I've spotted something in you. You may not realize you've got it yourself, but that can be enough to maybe just that little spark to light that fire in that potential leader as well. So that's quite an important thing, really.
Yeah, one of my beliefs and my principles is that leaders create more leaders. That's what great leaders do. They create more leaders. And in fact, that's essential for organizations to evolve and grow. And by grow, I don't necessarily just mean bigger, but if you are growing and getting bigger, absolutely. But evolving, that evolution of a business, people are going to leave, people are going to retire, however, whatever happens of however they exit the business. Therefore, if they're not creating leaders along the way, that is the role of a leader, to create leaders, right? So organizations really need to be thinking about that, and it's not just a one-time thing. Oh, we're going through a period of growth, we need to identify and upskill some leaders, send them on a course, send them on some training. No, it needs to be part of your culture. That's what great leaders do. They're developing people, challenging people all the time. And on that, the idea, yes, and how sometimes that's identifying people. And one of the blockers that we talk about this on the belief element of my ABLE formula, is the blockers for a lot of people to step up and step into something, whether it's a promotion, a leadership promotion, or just even want to sort of develop those skills. It can be a confidence thing.
Yeah.
And, you'll remember I talk about the difference between courage and confidence. And confidence comes from competence, but it's courage that people need in those times when they may lack the belief, they lack the experience, so therefore they think, well, why me? What do I know, or how much experience do I have, or what can I teach, or what could I give other people? That in those moments, it's courage that not just people need to find within themselves, but which leaders need to encourage in others, encourage people to, do you know what? Forget, like, you don't need to be confident, but just have the courage to lean into it, step outside your comfort zone, challenge yourself, do something new. And that's it. I said earlier, leaders, the job of leader is to challenge people. And that isn't
Yeah.
always comfortable, and it's not always nice feeling. And sometimes people react to that defensively and dig their heels in through fear, right?
Mm.
Drives a lot of people, holds a lot of people back. But that's the job of a leader, to challenge people when they think people have more potential for growth or for a particular role or something, and they're just holding themselves back. It's that accountability
Yeah.
which, that leaders develop, and that can be uncomfortable.
Yeah, courage over confidence. I think it's one of the things I took a couple of little snippets from your course, little sort of almost recurring phrases that I kept in my mind. And courage over confidence, I think, is certainly one that, I've personally used that in a few different ways.
Yeah.
Sometimes in work, sometimes not in work. At the local cricket club, we started a darts team. I'm rubbish at darts. I just thought, oh, sod it, let's give it a go. I can hit the board, which is the main thing. But yeah, but no, I think that courage over confidence is massive. You kind of alluded there a little bit about the company culture, and I think if you're a business leader and you want to develop more leaders, I think almost having the kind of culture where you do take a few of the barriers away, take the fear away, and promote that courage, reward courage. I think those are certainly a lot of things that you can do. I think one of the things that we've been trying to do here is we don't recruit leaders. We or not managers, sorry. We recruit people who then work, and we develop people as leaders. But we sometimes look for people in our recruitment process. They might be a rookie, they might come from a different industry, but we'll look for people who maybe have the right traits for leadership. But then we can then start putting people into those slightly uncomfortable situations. Typically, it'd be around leading training sessions. If you've got to sit down with everyone in the whole office, listening to you talk about a particular thing, a lot of people find it quite nerve-wracking. But it's I'm going to use a phrase that one of my former colleagues, he's an ultra runner, and he says it's type 2 fun, so it doesn't feel fun at the time, but when you look back on it, you go, oh, it was all right, that.
Yeah.
But that's how it can be in terms of getting yourself out of that comfort zone.
Yeah.
And pushing forward there. So courage is massively important as well, and it can be really enjoyable. I suppose you can go a little bit too far. I remember reading a book called Flow, and I can't pronounce the author's name. I think you can, can't you? But
Mihaly it's passed me by.
oh, I'll set you up there, Martin.
I think it's Csikszentmihalyi.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But I think he was a big sort of proponent of there's a comfort zone and a stress zone, but you need to find yourself in the stretch zone, somewhere in the middle there. And I think if you're being pushed too far into the stress zone, then that's when you get disengagement from that side. So I suppose if you're a business leader, then if you're conscious of pushing people enough but not too much, then I think that's sometimes where you can get your best results. Certainly, that's what I've found in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually, a good point, good timing. So if I finish my model, that after the B, we come down into the L, which is leverage. And in there, I talk about, which is similar to the flow model, I talk about the inverted U theory. It's one of the first theories I discovered when I was studying sports psychology, and that is the relationship between performance and stress. And so in this part of my training, I cover that. Well, what are some of the models, some of the tools that leaders can use to help identify that, like where somebody actually is in their development? Because you're right, it's such an important point. How do we know and how do we gauge whether somebody's in that stretch zone or we're actually asking a bit too much of them? And that's a really important topic right now, high on the agenda for a lot of businesses, because mental health is just right at the top of the agenda, right across the world. So knowing that is, companies now are more sensitive to that, but we've also got to have some guidance and some tools to be able to make that decision. And we're not always going to get it right, but if we've got some tools that can help us to manage that decision better as to whether we keep somebody in that zone and we're stretching them and challenging them, or we're asking too much of them,
Yeah.
That's a really important balance to find, because
Yes.
you are right about it. Once people stay in that stress zone for too long, they will disengage.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's just that's the start of it.
Yeah. One of the things that we've been tasked with doing, we get a lot of support from Investors in People, and a lot of the work we just went through a reaccreditation. It was great, and I think the guy called Simon Howarth, who is our Investors in People sort of consultant, if you like. He talks about measuring employee happiness and employee well-being. How do you measure that? It's quite a tricky one. I'm not there yet. Well, we're not there yet in terms of having an accurate way to measure it, because it's quite a subjective thing.
Yeah.
But I think if you've got a hand on it and you're kind of looking out for various different things, then you can kind of keep your finger on the pulse so that things don't go awry for too long. So that's quite key. But yeah, the leverage bit and getting yourself in that right level of sort of stress or stretch, if you like, is quite an important thing. What's
And
the final?
it's different for each person as well. What
Mm,
causes one person stress will motivate another, and vice
yeah.
versa. Hence why we start with understanding personality styles, because
Mm,
if we don't know that, then we don't know how to adapt our approach. And
yeah.
that's the key. It's knowing that actually, each person will respond differently to different stresses.
Mm,
It all
yeah.
starts with understanding of the person and the personality.
Got you. Got you. Um, a quick question on the DISC profile and understanding personalities. A lot of businesses we work with will use that as almost as like a selection tool as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm not a big fan of using it as a selection tool. But what I found where I got more value out of that was actually using it post-selection, using it as almost as a management tool
Yeah.
to understand more about the person I've got, how I'm going to communicate with that person, what's going to stretch them, what's going to motivate them, what's going to stress them and disengage them, and that side of things. But I mean, do you sort of see a lot of the clients that you work with using that as either selection or a management tool, or how do you see other businesses using that tool?
Yeah, well, personally, I use it predominantly as a development tool,
Mm,
to help people to develop that self-awareness, firstly to
yeah.
manage themselves better, but then to be able to connect and communicate and build relationships with the people around them. So I use it as a development tool, but I have
Mm,
clients that I use it with as part of their selection.
mm,
And understanding team dynamics as well. That's, it's really important to do that. That,
yeah.
you know, that you understand team dynamics and how different personalities will change the dynamic and the culture of a team.
Mm,
And so I think as a selection tool, it's never the be all and end all. Some people can get too hung up on it.
yeah.
Ultimately, there's other factors that will influence somebody's behavior and output. It's not just personality, it's values as well,
Mm,
and environment. You can take somebody that's got a certain personality, a certain set of values, and put them in the wrong environment, and that
mm,
is going to be challenging for them to perform in the right way or at their best. So there's lots of factors just out, it's not a one, I don't have a one-dimensional approach with tools
mm,
like that. I just feel that, no, they're an added layer of data, but data alone is not, going to solve any of the problems. You need to
got
bring
you.
context and just use it. It's how you use that data. So I
Got
think
you.
that they're an incredibly valuable tool, but they're multi-dimensional.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. So, what's the final part of your sort of ABLE formula then? What does the E represent?
So the E then is, you know, that's potentially the most important part, and E's for execution. And that's
Mm,
about, you know, taking all of your knowledge and actually understanding that you can't apply absolutely everything you know all of the time. One of
mm,
the things that leaders are challenged with is well, my use of my time. What do I actually know? Where do I focus? What's going to be my priority? And making those decisions is difficult.
mm.
But focus means less, not more. And it's
Yeah.
about helping people to identify and use some tools to identify the areas they're going to focus on the most. And what I call, as we go through my program, it's 30 principles condensed into 10 habits.
Yeah.
I call the 10 leadership habits, but I say to people like, we're just going to focus on 2. Which 2 are going to help you in the next quarter, for example, to achieve your goals? If you could only focus on 2, which 2 would they be? And really help people, because often leaders just spread themselves too thin trying to do everything well at once, and of course the standards drop because they're diluted.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
one of the most pivotal roles is decision making, and there's nothing more important than deciding what you put your time into. So helping people to make those decisions is key to bringing it all together, really, and actually using everything around the model. So the E's for execution, and it's about applying what you've learned.
Yeah.
Because you can have all the theory in the world, but if you don't go and use it, it's redundant.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I can think of my own experience, and I can also think a little bit about some of the people that I've been working with over maybe the last 3 or 4 years. I've known several candidates who's really talented engineers who desperately want to become managers, and they keep struggling to get someone to believe in them to offer them a job at the management level, or they're coming up against candidates who have got that track record as a manager, and they're thinking, how do I get my foot in the door there? One of the things I learned is it's the Nike logo, really, or slogan is just do it. Don't wait to be asked. So if you've done all this work, you've got your belief in yourself, you've got your leadership style, you've learned the tools and the techniques and all that sort of stuff. The final thing is actually just put something in place. Don't wait to be asked and do that. I think the more I reflect on it now, actually, just through the course of this conversation, I think the reason I manage and have the sort of culture champion role and things like that is because a lot of our leaders were off last year, and I just took it upon myself to organise training for people in the business, and organised almost like a simple Excel spreadsheet of all these are all the different things that we're going to do, and I started doing it. No one asked me to do that. I just thought, I'm just going to do this because I could see there was a need there for it, and I felt like I knew a good way to do it. And then off the back of that, then I got the sort of the recognition, the promotions, and that side of things.
Fantastic. And that, again, that takes some courage, right? Because you don't have all the answers. You've not been asked to do it. There's no permission. It takes some courage. Certainly not confidence, because if you haven't done that before and you've not been asked to do it, then it does. It's having that impetus to take action. So good for you. It's brilliant to hear that. And I think, that is ultimately, it's what Henry Ford said. He said, you can't build a reputation on what you're going to do.
Yes. Yeah.
It's what you've done. And you can just end up with analysis paralysis if you overthink. Sometimes thinking just is the worst thing for us. It just gets in the way and clouds our ability to take action, which is, the most important measure. That's what you're going to be measured and judged on.
Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. So if we could kind of maybe come away with a few sort of take-home points for this. Firstly, for that person who maybe wants to become a leader, they're frustrated, they're trapped at that kind of level, or they feel they're trapped at a level where they can't get a foot into leadership. What would you say would be like, if there's like 1 or 2 things for that person to do to sort of drive themselves forward, is there anything you could suggest?
Okay, right. Well, let me share. So you mentioned to me, I did a post on social this week about a meeting I had last week with my business mentor. We talked about a model he uses called Pie and Peas. Now, Pie is from a guy called Jack Welch, who used to run General Electric, so huge organization. He had a big passion and focus on developing people talent and getting the best out of people. That's his model. Peas is Chris's, that's his own model, and then I came up with my own, which is gravy, which because pie and peas is nothing without gravy. So
absolutely.
But we could maybe talk about that in a future podcast or something, Chris. But if I focus on the pie, because I think the pie answers your question perfectly. The pie stands, the P in pie stands for performance. So the first thing is making sure that I am doing my job to the best of my ability. So that's the first thing you've got to make sure you're doing. Like, if you're ambitious, you want that leadership opportunity. Are you doing your job to the best? Are you actually carrying out your role in a professional, successful way? So focusing on being really good at what you do is number one. But that alone is not enough, because guess what? The further you climb, the more people you come across and meet that are just as good, or if not better than you, at doing that job, right? And that happens in both business and sport, right?
Yeah.
So then we move down to the I, and the I stands for image. Now, image is how other people see you.
Yeah.
And that is, comprised of lots of different things, but we're also judged on our image. What do people think about us? And that's about, how do we conduct ourselves? How professional are we? What do people say about us when we're not there? So you might, if you've got two people are very good at their job, but one person's image is, oh, well, yeah, they're nice to the people that they think are going to get them somewhere, but then I've seen them speak down to people that can't do anything for them. They're not a very nice person, or I've heard a few dodgy stories, or just bits of dodgy behavior about them, or they're a bit untrustworthy, or they don't really always follow through on what they say they're going to do. If that's the image across an organization, we know who's going to get the opportunity or not.
Yeah.
If someone's going to an interview, there's things that it's their image of how they show up. That is going to play a part. And then finally, the E stands for exposure. And that is exposure to key decision makers and influencers. That you can be really good at what you do. You might have a solid image and reputation, but if nobody knows about you, then guess what? You're going to have less opportunities to somebody else.
Yes.
So you've got to work through all levels of the model.
Yeah.
Right? And if you do that, you stand a good chance. So I would recommend those as some, 3 early action steps for people. It's like they've got to first be interested in their own performance and breaking that down, understanding how they can get better. And that desire for self-improvement, it all stems from that. But then think about wider, how are they viewed, maybe externally, but also internally in the business to their own colleagues. I work with a lot of salespeople, and I often ask them, how much do you think about your internal image and communication? Because sales is mostly externally focused on clients, candidates in your position. You're communicating outside of the business. But how much do you think about how you're viewed internally? And not a lot of salespeople do think about that. And finally, exposure. How can you increase your exposure? And there's no excuses today, with social media tools and platforms like LinkedIn. That you can put content out, build your own personal brand. There's lots of things that you can do to have that exposure today.
That's a great model. That I do like that. I think just to add my own sort of things into my own experience into that, I think my advice to anyone who wanted to become a leader is, I was listening to a podcast by Stuart Lancaster, the former England rugby coach.
Yeah.
And one of the things he said is leaders go first. And for me, what that means is, don't be afraid to be the first one to do it. You don't have to be the best at it.
Yeah.
But I think if you've got something new that you need to achieve, have the courage over confidence.
Yeah.
Go first. Others will follow. And you kind of want people to be better than you if you are a leader, because you're not there to be an expert at everything. You want other people to do really, really well. So I think first of all is leaders go first. The second thing is it's not about me. It's about sort of sharing. So if you're going into it, I think your intentions are really important. That I'm sure you can probably think of some people that you may have come across in either your professional life or at uni or in sport, where you can see it's just about that person's ego, and it's it can carry them a certain way. But when we talk about leadership, influencing people, it's just a massive turn off. Maybe that's just my own personal beliefs on it. But I think where you've got people who are more thinking about what's best for the group as a whole, not necessarily for them, then I think that will show through a lot in their subconscious sort of cues as well. You know, if you feel like you've got a leader who really cares about you, you'll do anything for them, you know, because you know that there's sincerity to them as well. So I think for me is, don't be afraid to lead with something that maybe not everyone else is doing, just to sort of set an example, a positive example, but also then be prepared to share. And I think that sort of sharing the knowledge. We've one of the chaps here that's is our top performer really. One of the things I really like about Paul is he shares his knowledge, his shortcuts, his the reasons or the little things that he's done to improve his performance. He's completely open with sharing those with other people. He doesn't manage anyone at the moment, but I think he is a leader in our business because he'll try something out first, then he'll say, "Oh, do you know what? This is working for me," you know, and he shares that amongst the team, and I think that's great. Rather than having that fear of, I don't want to lose my number one spot, I'm going to keep this to myself.
Yeah,
but I think
often that's what it is. When people close up, it's through fear, and you know, it takes confidence to be that open. And normally, you find successful people are like that because if they have that inner confidence, then they're happy and they want to see other people do well. Because if they're doing well, it encourages and holds them to a standard to keep improving themselves. I always remember reading that about Richard Branson, that he always wanted to surround himself with people that were much smarter than him. And he felt inferior in many of the boardrooms he was in terms of his business knowledge, but he was still the one leading the organization. But he surrounded himself with people smarter than him. And, you know, that comes down to humility. You know, we talk, you know, on the course you were on, we speak about humility and the link, you know, the All Blacks have got it, you know, as a central principle in their philosophy, and they're the most successful sports team of all time. So humility is really, really important, and you know, such a good point, Chris, because often, you know, people can think that their intentions for wanting that leadership may be self-driven, and actually, it isn't about you. It is about others. And that's where the fulfillment of the role comes from.
Yes.
And it's not easy. It's not easy too. So I think if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, eventually you'll either be found out or you'll burn out.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But I mean, I suppose if you've got that ability the courage to go first and then the willingness to share, personally, I feel that, you know, we'll get spotted. You know, it almost becomes, if you do that enough, it becomes inevitable, and then you'll get that chance. So I suppose the final thing is just having the patience to stick with that for long enough, so that you get your exposure in your pie, which is great. So I suppose that's really good advice there for, you know, I like the pie model, really like the pie model, for anyone who wants to become a leader. And then probably to finish off with, then, if you're a business leader and you're worried about the next generation of leaders within your own business, you know, what steps can you take to then put yourself in that better position to try and develop people internally to become your next generation of leaders?
Good question. I like to say, you know, there's a couple of clients I can think of with long-term projects, developing those people now. And you've got to be thinking in advance. So you've got to be investing in people. There's that great quote, isn't there? It's you know, you and the listeners may have heard of it, where they say, somebody says, "What if I train all of my people?" The CEO says, "What if I train all of my people, though? I invest in them and train them all up, and then they all leave." And then back comes the other question. It says, "Well, what if you don't and they stay?"
Yeah.
You know, what are you going to be left with then? And so that can often be a fear for leaders and organizations, but that will always happen. You know, people will always move on, but it's about developing a culture where you invest in people and thinking for the future all of the time. Like I say, it can't just be a one-time project. Oh, we've got a new opportunity, or we're growing as a team in this department. They need some leadership skills. Let's just send them on a program, and then it's situational. No, it needs to be continuous. It needs to be part of your culture. It needs to be ongoing. You know, the best investment any team can make is their people, because that is what makes a team.
Yes.
You know, so it's thinking about that, not just how are you going to do it for a one-off? It's how are you going to actually ingrain it in everything that you do? So it's part of your culture, and it's on a regular basis. You're always thinking about developing your people and identifying those future leaders, and that just starts with developing people, you know, and
Yes.
for them to just be excellent at what they do.
Yes. Yeah.
Develop their own people skills, and eventually those skills, they just become so valuable to pass on to other people that naturally they'll start to gravitate into those leadership positions.
Yes. No, that's a good thing. I've come across that quite a lot in recruitment, and sometimes with like hiring managers having concerns of, oh, what if I train this person up and then leave and we've wasted all that money and all that sort of stuff. And sometimes I can think of certain skill sets in engineering where maybe the people that acquire those skills are very mercenary and they will just take the course and they'll go off contracting and that side of things. So you'll always get burnt in that kind of way. I think one of the things is you kind of you ask the question of what if you don't train them and they stay, but also what if you do train them and they become happy and fulfilled and they contribute loads to your business. So there's actually a positive outcome to that as well. I think one of the things is that you mentioned there, it's not a one-time thing, it's forever. You've always got to be learning. Tony Robbins has got a great quote, which is, you're either growing or you're dying, which is quite extreme, but I think I've got to the age now where I think it might be shrinking slightly as well, so it's a real worry for me. But in terms of the learning side of things, I thought it was fantastic. So yeah, fine, you develop someone, you get into that first rung of leadership, but then you've got to make sure, well, actually your responsibility as a business leader is to keep challenging, to keep growing and think, okay, brilliant, you've got to there, great, well done. How can we now take it to the next level? And you're always constantly looking ahead. I know you've done a lot of your work and you based a lot around Sir Alex Ferguson, who was a master at that, wasn't he? You can't survive in probably the most high profile football management job in the world for 26 years unless you're prepared to keep evolving, keep learning and developing. So I think that's certainly a really good way to do that. I think the thing about culture, I think, is really important, of trying to strip away some of the fear. And I'm guessing probably relying a little bit on what we're doing at the moment internally to develop our own leaders. As I say, we tend not to recruit other people to come in and manage the team. In fact, I don't think we've ever done it, and I can't see how that would kind of work for us. What works for us is we recruit people for the business, and then from those leaders emerge. But we're quite deliberate, and we make no bones about this. If there's someone we think can lead, we'll then break it down and start giving them specific tasks and experiences. And then sooner or later, they will have amassed this experience and they'll be ready. I think Emma Crayford, who's our operations director, wrote did a bit of a Q&A. It's on our website. And one of the things that really stood out to me about that is that she'll push people into leadership before they feel they're ready for it, because people rise to the challenge. And I think that's probably a good thing. So my personal experience of being someone who's been through that, but now someone who's trying to help others come up as well, is give people a chance, and it's actually not anything to be scared of as a business leader. If you give your people in your team an extra bit of responsibility, it's amazing how they rise to the challenge and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And everybody needs that. Everybody needs other people to believe in them.
Yes. Yeah.
That's where it begins. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Perfect. Well, look, thanks for talking me through, obviously, your sort of views on leadership there. I think hopefully there's some really good takeaways for either anyone who wants to become a leader or for those businesses where they want to develop their team to be, the leaders within their own business as well. Hopefully, sort of be able to share some of those lessons with a lot of people. But Martin, yeah, thanks again for your time today. It's been brilliant to catch up.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. No, really enjoyed it, and yeah, just having the opportunity to just chat and share some ideas, and hopefully everyone's got some takeaways.
Perfect. Good stuff. I also like the fact that you've plugged the book as well. So you're clearly a professional at these kind of interviews. So I like that. I didn't go unnoticed. I'd also sort of, having been on your course myself, I'd recommend it to anyone as well. The 2-day course that I did with you, I'm sure you do probably more stuff than that as well, because I know you do quite a lot of different things. But for me, as someone who's a recruiter, but also a manager, I think it gave me a lot of clarity in terms of my approach. So I definitely recommend your services to anyone else who wants to develop their leaders.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate that. And yeah, for anyone listening that wants to connect with me, probably the easiest place to do that is just LinkedIn. Just search Martin Robert Hall and you know, send me a connection request, and hopefully we get some people that do that. And yeah, happy to engage with anyone. So thanks, Chris. I appreciate that.